Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about conditional type 0, type 1, and type 2. First, let's have a quick revision of type 0 and type 1. We use conditional type 0 to talk about scientific facts, common sense, and sometimes we use this type of conditional sentences to talk about habits. For example, if we heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. If we don't water the plants, they die. We use present tense in both the if clause and the main clause. For the if clause, since the condition is always true, we use present tense. For the main clause, basically, under these conditions, they are 100% true, and that's why we use present tense for the main clause as well. While for type 1 conditionals, we use this type of conditional sentences to talk about possible situations. This time, we use present tense in the if clause only, and we use future tense in the main clause. Because we are talking about the expected result in the future or at present, so we use future tense instead of present tense this time. For example, if Mr. Lam does more exercise, he will become slimmer. If you study hard, you will pass the exam. Sometimes we use type 1 conditionals to give advice, order, permission, and offer. For example, if you want to take some photos, I will lend you a camera. So this is an offer. And the second example, if you want to pass the exam, study hard. This time, this is a piece of advice. Sometimes when we give advice, we use imperatives in the main clause. Imperatives mean that you have to use the base form of the verb. You do not change the verb. So let's have a quick summary of type 0 and type 1. So both types talk about the situations that can or may happen at present or in the future. And in both cases, we use present tense in the if clause. But how about this one? If I have a lot of money, but in reality I don't, do I still use type 1 conditionals? Actually, when we are talking about imaginary situations, that means that these situations are impossible to happen in real life. Then we actually use type 2 conditionals to talk about these situations. For example, if Mr. Lam had a lot of money, he would retire earlier. If Mr. Lam were a student, he would study hard for the exam. In these two cases, you can see that we are using past tense in the if clause this time. And in the main clause, we are using the past tense of will, so would. Something that you need to pay attention to is that when the verb in an if clause is verb to be, we use were instead of was. In fact, if I were you is a very common expression we use when we give advice. For example, if I were you, I would study harder. In this case, we are using type 2 conditionals because I can never be you. So this condition, if I were you, is basically impossible to happen. So we are using type 2 conditionals. Let's have a quick summary of type 2 conditionals. We use type 2 conditionals to talk about imaginary situations. That means that these situations are impossible to happen in reality, and that's why we are using a different type of conditional sentences. So this table shows the tenses that you need to use in different types of conditional sentences. For both type 0 and type 1, we use present tense in the if clause. And for type 2 conditionals, it's just like telling a story because it is impossible to happen, we use past tense. For the main clause, for type 0, basically it's 100% true, so we use present tense. For type 1, we are talking about some possible results, so we use future tense. And for type 2, as we're using past tense in the if clause, so we are using past tense of will. That means we need to use the word would in the main clause. So this is the end of this video. Thank you.